welcome to Nayfee Paints. In this video, I'll be showing you how to do some simple yet effective graffiti to give your terrain that extra point of colour and interest. With that, let's crack in. Before doing anything, I had to decide where the graffiti was going to be placed. The options I came up with were up the top here on the flooring, underneath on this little walkway, on the bottom half of this big green tank, up the top on this smaller thinner tank, but the place I decided to put it was on the bottom section of this small tank in this nice flat area. With the placement of the graffiti decided, now I had to figure out what it was going to look like and say. The graffiti I've gone with is from House Escher, as I think the bright colours of the gang and the graffiti itself will work well together. I'm not a graffiti artist, so lettering is not my speciality. I can barely write using a pen. I used a website to help me with the lettering. I'll put a link in the description below if you're interested. And I just sketched out myself a couple of different ways to write the word Escher. Once I'd done that, I chose the two that I was most happy with, gave them a basic background, and in the end, I decided to go with this bubble lettering with this cloud pattern in the background. With that done, I carefully cut it out, keeping both pieces to use as stencils. Before moving on, I just dry fitted it into position to make sure it looks good and I was happy with it. This stencil here will form the background of the piece. To apply the stencil to the model, I do this with blue tack. So I just go around the stencil applying some blue tack. The most important areas are the inner parts of the stencil. The reason for this is due to using an airbrush, the air coming out of the brush, if you don't stick it down correctly, will fold this up and the paint will get underneath. Now onto the airbrushing. Before applying any paint to the area, I've masked it off using some paper and tape. Just when using the tape, be aware it's not too sticky, as when you peel it off, it might tear some of the paint from the model. Now to apply the first paint. This is Daemonic Yellow from the Army Painter. Whenever using my airbrush, I always apply some flow improver to the paint just to help it flow through. I've also set the PSI to 20 on the compressor. This is enough to push the paint through the airbrush, without being strong enough to remove any of the paper. With this colour, it took 3 coats to build up a nice solid base. In between coats, I always let it dry fully before applying the next. The next step of the airbrushing is to add some Mythical Orange from the Army Painter to the Daemonic Yellow. This is a 70-30 mix of the yellow to orange. So I start at the bottom and work my way slowly up to about the middle. And with this mix, I applied in 2 even coats. With that mix applied, now it's time to add a little bit more Mythical Orange to the paint. So this is a 50-50 mix of the yellow and orange. Same thing as the last step, just working my way from the bottom up. This time I work my way up about a quarter of the way. This will leave the previous step showing. And once that dries, it gives me a nice blend from the yellow down to the orange. With the paint completely dried, I slowly and carefully remove the paper and blue tack from the model, to be left with not a perfect, but pretty decent background. To fix up some of the problem areas left by the blue tack, I've just gone back to my blue base on the tank and painted this in just to round off any of the circles. For the stencil of the lettering, I've just used my hobby knife to carefully cut this out. With the letters, once they were cut out, I put these to the side so I could use these as a guide later. With the lettering stencil, I'll be painting this in with a brush, so the amount of blue tack I had to put on was very minimal, as it's just to hold the stencil in position. Once I had the stencil on the model, I just used my ruler to quickly gauge the heights just to make sure it's roughly the same height. And measuring on a model that's already built, it was a little bit tricky with the base being different heights. So I wasn't worried about being off by about 1 mil on either end. Close enough in this situation for me was good enough. So for the colour of the lettering, I've gone with Blue Violet from the Army Painter. I've mixed in a little water with the paint just to thin it out a little bit. And I've just applied this paint with a brush, just being careful around the edges not to go under the lip of the stencil. I applied the Blue Violet in a few coats until I had a nice saturated background. Like the background, on the lettering I've tried to do a little blend here. So I've gone with two colours from Vallejo. These are blue violet and squid pink. The first coat here is a 80-20 mix of the blue violet to squid pink. I've also mixed in a drop of water to the paint to thin it out. And the same as the background, I've painted each letter about halfway up. Then I applied another coat of the two colours, this time a 70-30 mix. And I just painted a little bit less of each letter. The colour's very subtle on camera, you don't really notice it, but in person, it's a lot more striking. With the purple down, now it's time to outline the lettering. I've done this with the Abbadon Black, again mixed with a drop of water just to thin it out a little. To apply the outline, I've gone with a really fine tipped brush. When doing the outline, just go really, really slowly, taking your time. I also had a damp rag on hand, so any mistakes I could quickly wipe away. Other smaller mistakes that I wasn't too concerned about, I just went back with the colour I needed and touched those up. Using the letters I cut out earlier from the stencil as a guide, I just went around putting in all the black. I'm pretty happy with the lettering at the moment, but it just looks a little bit too flat. So to give it that balloon or bubble look, I've gone with straight squid pink from the Ami Painter and carefully added some highlights to the letters on the right hand side just to show the light coming from that direction. With that, the graffiti is now done. All I need to do now is just re-weather the areas around the graffiti and weather it slightly, and once the weathering is applied, the piece will be finished. And with the weathering added, the graffiti is now done. Thanks for watching Nayfee Paints. If you liked the video, please click the sub button or leave me a like. If there's anything you'd like to see in a future video, please leave a comment in the comment section below and I'll see you in the next one. Catch ya.